The royal council selected countless noble maidens for him, yet not a single one was accepted by his wolf spirit. It wasn't until that abandoned Omega girl entered the palace that the Alpha King's wolf spirit bowed its head in submission for the first time. Everyone was stunned. For the humblest of all had turned out to be the king's destined mate. I knelt on the cold basalt floor, my knees raw and bleeding from the sharp edges of the stone, as a bone-chilling cold seeped into my marrow through the cracks. All around me stood a dense crowd of nobles. Their lavish, heavy dark velvet cloaks cast shadows in the flickering torchlight, making them resemble a flock of silent crows awaiting the appearance of a rotting corpse. I am Ella, an Omega cast out of my ancient clan, an outcast in this harsh werewolf kingdom. Unworthy even of a name. The old men of the royal council stood on a raised platform. The Grand Duke's wrinkled hand was pointing at me, and his voice rang out sharply and piercingly through the empty palace, like a rusty blade scraping against sheet metal. Great King Caius of Alphonse. This woman has been found in possession of enemy runes, and forbidden artifacts of black magic were discovered outside your private chambers. The charges are proven, according to the kingdom's millennia-old code. Only by your own hand, through your personal judgment and execution of this traitor, can the justice and majesty of the royal house be upheld, the unrest among the werewolf tribes on the border be quelled, and the spirits of our ancestors in heaven be appeased. I strained to lift my head, my gaze sweeping across the dimly lit hall toward the man seated high upon the throne. He was the very nightmare of this land and the embodiment of the werewolf clan's power, Caius. He wore a set of jet black, engraved battle armor. His broad shoulders seemed capable of bearing the weight of heaven and earth. His face, with its sharp, chiseled features, was etched with utter loathing for this political coercion. And his deep gray eyes appeared mysterious and dangerous in the candlelight. Caius rose slowly from his throne. With every step he took, the clanging of his metal armor sounded like a heavy death knell, pounding step by step on my chest and making my eardrums ring. He stopped in front of me, and the oppressive aura emanating from a high alpha erupted suddenly, flooding over me like a tidal wave and making it nearly impossible for me to maintain my breathing. The air was thick with his distinct scent, a mixture of cold pine and fresh snow. Intensely aggressive, bitterly cold, and dangerous. Conclusive evidence. He looked down at me, his voice low and slow, deep within his rock-cold pupils. A faint red glow flickered, a sign that the savage wolf spirit within him was on the verge of spiraling out of control. An Omega whose combat instincts have atrophied, and yet he managed to infiltrate my bedchamber so easily and cast black magic. It seems the council's vision has now sunk so low that all they can see is the dust in the mud. A malicious smile played on the Grand Duke's lips. He took a slight step forward and said in a low, persuasive voice, "Your Majesty, this is happening in full view of everyone. The border commanders are all watching. If you do not execute her, you will be seen as weak. But if you do, your royal authority will be unshakable. And this will be your last chance to regain control of the wolf soul." Caius ignored the old man's chatter and suddenly clamped his long, meticulously manicured fingers around my jaw. His grip was astonishingly strong. His fingertips dug into my skin with a beast-like brutality. I was forced to tilt my head back and meet his gaze, which was filled with a desire for destruction. In that split second, I saw a flash of murderous intent deep in his eyes. She detested the council's manipulation. And he detested even more this political farce that would require him to shed blood with his own hands and would most likely destroy his sanity. I didn't cry, nor did I beg for mercy, even as fear churned in my lungs. I stared intently into his eyes, clenched my teeth with all my might, and whispered, "Will killing me save your so-called throne, Caius? Or are you just a dull knife in their hands, unable to even grip the hilt, left to be toyed with at the whim of these rats?" My words plunged the entire hall into an eerie silence. Caius's fingers, clamped around my jaw, suddenly froze. The air seemed to be sucked out of the room in that instant, and just as his fingertips inadvertently brushed against the hidden, faintly warm mate mark at the back of my neck, a strange, searing resonance exploded between us like a bolt of lightning. A low, agonized, bestial howl suddenly erupted from his chest. It was not the sound of a human, but rather the ancient giant wolf within him, which, At that moment, let out a low, submissive growl. The coldness in his eyes shattered in an instant, replaced by a bewilderment bordering on terror. He jerked his hand back as if struck by an invisible electric current, stumbling half a step backward as his hard leather boots scraped against the flagstones with a grating sound. He was panting heavily, his chest rising and falling faster and faster. At that moment, the dignity he had as a king crumbled completely. "It can't be," Caius growled hoarsely, his voice raspy and strained. He pressed both hands to his temples, as if struggling against some powerful force. The Grand Duke's smile froze on his face, while Queen Selina, who had been sitting upright at his side, dropped the golden goblet she was holding straight to the floor with a crisp, piercing crack. Crimson wine splattered across the floor, resembling an ominous bloodbath. I felt a fear unlike any I had ever experienced before. For I saw his pupils undergoing a dramatic transformation, their original deep gray turning into a suffocating, moonlight-like silvery white. The look in his eyes changed. He was no longer looking at a traitor, but at the one inalienable taboo in his life. My heart pounded like thunder. For I knew that at that very moment, fate had been completely rewritten. I, a lowly Omega, had become the fatal weakness of this ferocious beast. And this was precisely the scenario the council, which had sent me to the gallows, was most desperate to avoid. Caius spun around abruptly. And that cold, ruthless expression characteristic of a powerful figure once again took hold of his face. His icy voice swept through the hall like a biting wind. "The verdict is null and void. I will personally oversee this woman's punishment. Anyone who dares to mention the word execution again will be deemed a traitor to the throne, and I will personally wring their head off." "Your Majesty," the Grand Duke cried out, trying to stop him, his eyes flashing with a desperate, allure-nothing madness. "She is your destined mate, the source of the chaos in your bloodline. If you don't kill her..." Caius came to an abrupt halt. He turned his face to the side, and his eyes, which had completely turned silver, glinted with a cruel, icy light in the shadows. He didn't even turn around. Yet his overwhelming presence caused the Grand Duke to collapse instantly to the ground. "I know she is my destined partner. Since the moon goddess has placed her in my hands, she is mine on this land. And no one but me is allowed to touch her." He strode over to me and yanked me to my feet. His movements were rough, yet they carried a faint sense of unquestionable protection. He brought me back to his bedchamber, not out of pity, and certainly not to protect me, but to keep me, this source of trouble, firmly within his sight. It was to imprison me, and also to preserve what little sanity he had left in the midst of this power struggle. As the heavy oak door of the bedchamber slammed shut behind me, I knew that the real battle had only just begun. He pinned me against the cold wall, his breath heavy as the tide. Those eyes, burning with a silvery glow, stared intently at me from close range, as if trying to see right through my soul. "Tell me," he asked hoarsely, his voice suffused with endless struggle and longing. "Who are you, exactly? And why does even my wolf spirit feel this damned sense of obedience toward you?" I looked at him and clenched my fists, trembling. Even though I was in a desperate situation, I didn't back down. "I am a shadow you abandoned. Caius, if you want to know the truth, you must first learn to trust your wolf spirit." He suddenly clamped his hands around my shoulders with such force that it felt as if he were trying to press me into his body. A complex mix of emotions: anger, confusion, jealousy, and some indescribable, primal desire swirled wildly in his eyes. He lowered his head, his scorching breath washing over my neck. Just as I thought he was about to tear me apart in his stifling rage, he simply took a deep breath, inhaling my scented gesture as humble as that of a dying believer. Outside the window, the moonlight cast a cold glow on the kingdom's ancient castle. I knew the members of the council would never let this matter rest. And the venom in Queen Selina's eyes had already turned into a hidden arrow aimed at me. The air in the bedchamber was thick enough to suffocate. Every inch of the space was saturated with Caius's aura, that of a top predator scented with cold pine, damp rock, and a long-suppressed fury on the verge of erupting. He pinned me against the cold wall. The sharp pain as my back slammed into it snapped me back to my senses in an instant. but his burning chest pressed tightly against mine. And that irresistible alpha aura felt like an invisible chain that completely bound me. "Tell me, who exactly ordered you to infiltrate the palace?" His silvery eyes glinted eerily in the shadows. His tone carried not only the ruthlessness of an interrogator but also a sense of frustration born of instinct. A secret order from the Grand Duke, or a hidden hand from the northern tribes? I struggled to calm my racing heart, pressing both hands against his chest armor hard as iron in an attempt to push him away. But it was like an ant trying to shake a tree. I looked up and met his gaze. Though my voice trembled, it was unwavering. "Your Majesty, if you truly believe I am capable of infiltrating this heavily guarded palace, it can only mean that your royal guard is nothing but a bunch of good-for-nothings." Caius clearly hadn't expected me to retort. His gaze suddenly turned cold, and he tightened his grip on my wrist, as if relishing the thrill of controlling the flow of life. "Interesting. Aside from Selena, no one has ever dared to speak to me like that." He leaned in close to my ear, the tips of his teeth barely grazing the side of my neck. That dangerous touch sent a shiver of physical instinct through me. "But you should know that here. Lying is not only a crime, it's punishable by death." His hoarse voice carried a hint of unsettling allure. "The mark the moon goddess has imprinted on me won't deceive me. You carry the scent of the purest blood of my people, the oldest of all. Tell me, whose orphan are you, exactly?" My heart gave a sudden jolt. That was my secret, a deep-seated knot I had always taken great care to conceal. Before his exile, my father had sternly warned me never, under any circumstances, to let anyone know that the blood of the lost royal lineage flowed through my veins. I couldn't help but bite my lip, my body tensing with anxiety. I could feel his keen sense of smell probing my skin, trying to uncover the truth hidden by magic. "I'm just an abandoned Omega," I said, staring intently at the badge on his chest scorched by the flames of battle and doing my best to keep my voice steady. "A prisoner with no past and unworthy of a future. If you want to torture me, you can do it right now. Why go through the charade of this interrogation?" Caius's finger glided across my cheek, and his icy fingertip sent a chill of despair through me. Suddenly, he let out a cold laugh and shoved me away with a backhand. I stumbled to the ground, and blood began to seep from my knees once more. He turned away, his back to me, and that broad silhouette looked incredibly lonely and ferocious in the moonlight, putting on a show. He suddenly spun around and slammed his fist into the stone pillar beside him, sending shards of rock flying. That brutal impulse made his entire body seem slightly contorted. "Those old fools in the council want me to kill my mate with my own hands, so they can completely destroy my wolf spirit as an alpha. Do they think I don't know that?" As I watched his angry back, the fear in my heart was suddenly replaced by an inexplicable sense of pity. He was a caged beast, ruling over the entire kingdom yet unable to control even his own fate. "If I'm your mate, then this is exactly when you need me." I pushed myself up off the ground and forced myself to walk behind him, even though the oppressive pressure still made my bones ache. "As long as you need me, I can be your bargaining chip against Themor even. Your shield." Caius turned his head, his silver eyes narrowed to slits. The look he gave me was incredibly complex. It held suspicion, pain, and, above all, a long-buried sense of uncertainty. He suddenly grabbed my wrist and led me in long strides toward the huge floor-to-ceiling window in the bedchamber. He pointed to the forbidden forest outside the window, bathed in moonlight, his voice so low it sounded like a sigh. "Evidence." He snorted coldly, pointing toward the faintly visible altar in the distance. "Tomorrow at dawn, the Grand Duke will bring his men to the bedchamber to examine the evidence against you. If you cannot produce proof of your innocence by then, I will personally send you to the execution block. You can't save me, can you?" I asked bluntly, my heart skipping a beat. He didn't say a word. He just tightened his grip, his fingers clenching so hard they nearly crushed my knuckles. He yanked me back toward him so suddenly that we were close enough to feel each other's breath. A flicker of struggle passed through his silvery eyes, only to give way to a bottomless chill. "If you can't prove to me tonight that you're more than just a nuisance, by the time the sun rises tomorrow morning, there will be nothing here but one more cold corpse." With those words, he turned and strode out of the bedchamber, leaving only the heavy clang of chains echoing through the empty room. I slumped against the windowsill, watching his retreating figure, and tears finally welled up in my eyes. But I knew I couldn't cry. I reached up to touch the back of my neck, where there was a deliberately hidden tattoo that felt faintly warm. It was the last memento my father had left me, and my only hope for survival. Just then, a secret door in the bedchamber suddenly swung open, and a figure cloaked in a hood silently slipped into the room. It was Queen Selena's confidant, a watcher I had seen countless times in the dungeon. "It seems the king isn't as ruthless toward you as I'd expected," the man said in a low voice, a cold glint flashing in his eyes. "But he can't save you. As long as you're alive, the Grand Duke's plan cannot be carried out. Tonight, you must die or choose to switch sides." As I stared at the dagger glinting coldly, the last shred of hope in my heart was completely cut off. That figure approached like a ghost, its dagger glinting with a chilling, ghostly blue hue in the firelight was coated with the highly toxic magic-suppressing powder, potent enough to instantly strip any werewolf of its ability to heal itself. With my back pressed against the cold stone wall, my heart pounding, I could almost feel that soul-chilling coldness washing over me. "Are you one of Selena's people?" I tried to keep my voice calm, though my right hand had already slipped toward the silver needle tucked inside my sleeve, the only weapon I'd managed to steal from the dungeon. "Do you really think killing me will change the situation within the royal family?" The dark figure let out a short, cold chuckle, and the eyes peering from beneath the cloak radiated coldness and sarcasm. "As far as the kingdom is concerned right now, whether you live or die is nothing more than a pawn on the Grand Duke's chessboard. But if you can become Her Majesty the Queen's sharpest weapon, you might just earn yourself a chance to cling to life." He lunged forward suddenly, the sound of the dagger slicing through the air as sharp as the wind. I dodged to the side, my body bursting with astonishing agility as I tensed to the limit, a result of the harrowing experiences I'd endured over the past few years fighting wild beasts for food in the slums. I grabbed the heavy candlestick from the table with my other hand and slammed it down hard on his wrist. The metal clanged with a dull thud. The opponent recoiled in pain. The hood of his cloak slipped back, revealing a face covered in scars. It was the Queen's most trusted assassin and one of the executioners who had banished me from my family many years ago. Hatred surged through my chest like molten lava, and I growled through clenched teeth. "It's you. You were the one who led the raid on my home all those years ago. So what? It's survival of the fittest in this world. And a lowly Omega like you is destined to be a sacrifice to power." He grinned savagely and launched another attack, holding nothing back. Just as the situation reached a critical juncture, the heavy doors of the bedchamber swung open once more, and a gale laced with a suffocating stench of blood instantly swept through the room. Caius appeared in the doorway. His once immaculate battle armor was now stained with dark blood, and the moment his silver-white eyes saw me in danger, they transformed completely into the vertical pupils of a beast. "Who gave you the audacity to attempt an assassination in my private chambers?" His roar thundered like a passing storm, and the walls of the entire chamber seemed to tremble. The assassin clearly hadn't expected the king to return. His expression changed drastically, and he turned to flee. But Caius was faster, like a bolt of black lightning slicing through the darkness. He had his hand around the assassin's throat in the blink of an eye. With a bone-chilling crack, the assassin's body slumped limply to the ground before he even had time to let out a cry. Caius casually tossed the body aside and strode over to me. His chest heaved violently as he unleashed his alpha aura without restraint, causing my knees to buckle and nearly forcing me to my knees once more. His powerful hand grabbed me by the collar and yanked me up to face him. His silver eyes were filled with the brutality of a kill and an overwhelming complexity of emotions. "Just how much are you still hiding from me, Ella?" His voice was low, hoarse, and trembling, tinged with a kind of anger born of feeling toyed with. The Queen's personal guard appeared in my bedchamber. "Were you trying to use this assassin to test my limits? Or are you actually a decoy set up by the Queen?" I watched the blood still clinging to his fingertips. The droplets were falling onto the back of my hand, burning hot. I endured the excruciating pain and looked straight into his eyes. which were brimming with madness. If I'm the bait, why would I risk my life to kill him? Caius. I've been living like a rat in this castle, not even daring to take a deep breath. Do you really think I'm capable of teaming up with the queen? He stared at me intently, and the intensity of his gaze made me feel as if he were about to tear me to pieces at any moment. But he didn't. He simply flung me roughly onto the couch, then tore down a curtain from the bedchamber and wrapped it around my arm, which had been grazed by a dagger. His movements were clumsy and rough, yet they carried an unmistakable, almost self-destructive urgency. Don't try to test my patience, he said coldly, turning away. His back seemed somewhat unsteady. After tonight, the entire royal family will know that you assassinated the queen's confidant. The Grand Duke will use this against me. He'll say you're not just a curse, but an assassin lurking within the royal family. So what are you going to do? I looked at his blood-stained armor, and a strange sense of kinship suddenly welled up inside me. Desolation felt by two cast-offs. Are you going to hand me over in exchange for your peace of mind? He whipped his head around, his silver eyes flashing with a determination bordering on despair. If handing you over could bring peace to the entire kingdom, I would have done it long ago. But I've discovered that as soon as you disappear from my sight, the wolf's spirit within me lets out an unbearable howl. Ella, not only can I not bring myself to kill you, but I've even realized I can't live without you. After he said those words, it was as if all his strength had been drained. His powerful body slumped against the wall, his breathing rapid and ragged. I knew that the bond between soulmates was growing stronger, that some ancient curse was tightly entwining our two completely opposing fates. Your Majesty, I was just about to speak when I suddenly heard the heavy clang of armor outside the door. Your Majesty Kai. Us. I apologize for disturbing you so late at night. The Grand Duke's menacing voice rang out from outside the door, accompanied by the glow of dozens of torches illuminating the corridor. We have received a report of an unusual bloody odor emanating from your bedchamber moments ago. To ensure your safety, and by special authorization from the council, we must enter and search the premises. Caius looked at me, his despair and resolve intertwined in that moment. He strode up to me, grabbed my hand, and squeezed it so hard it felt as if he were carving his name into my bones. No matter what happens in a moment, don't say a word, just look into my eyes, he whispered, his tone strangely tinged with a hint of pleading. From now on, you're not just my partner, you're my weapon in the fight against the entire kingdom. The main gate swung open, and the Grand Duke stormed in, accompanied by dozens of heavily armed guards. The sight of the bodies on the ground and his feigned look of shock nearly made me sick. I looked at Caius. He stood tall, shielding me behind him, in the glow of the flames. His towering figure resembled a fortress on the verge of collapse. Your Majesty, what is going on here? The Grand Duke let out a series of cold laughs, his gaze shifting back and forth between me and the corpse. This which has actually committed murder in your bedchamber, are you really going to continue shielding her? Caius slowly drew the sword from his belt, pointing the blade directly at the Grand Duke's throat. The aura of authority he exuded caused all the guards present to involuntarily take a step back. Who told you she was the one who did it? Caius's voice was icy and cutting. I handled this matter myself, Grand Duke. If you're going to question the king's decision over a dead servant, I wouldn't mind replacing the head of the council tonight. The Grand Duke's pupils suddenly contracted, but he clearly had another trick up his sleeve. He clapped his hands, and a gaunt woman, her body shackled, was brought forward, none other than another key member who had participated in the exile of my family all those years ago. Your Majesty, there's more than that. The Grand Duke pointed at the woman. We've uncovered this woman's true background. She is a remnant of an exiled clan. She is a witch burdened by a curse. If she remains in the palace, your wolf spirit will be completely drained within 3 days. Caius stood there stiffly, and as I watched his trembling back, my fear reached its peak. The atmosphere in the bedchamber was so oppressive it made me want to vomit. The woman who had been brought announced my father's maid now stood there with her hair in disarray, staring at me with a vacant gaze, as if she were witnessing a prophecy of my inevitable doom. Caius, do you hear me? The Grand Duke took a step forward, his voice tinged with an almost twisted fervor. The curse of the exiled family is the very source of the frenzy in your bloodline. As long as she lives, this evil fire will burn through your sanity and turn you into a beast that knows only how to kill. Caius didn't turn around. All I could see was the taut line of his jaw and his fingers, trembling slightly as he struggled to control himself. That stifled silence was more heart-stopping than any roar. The wolf spirit within him was howling. I knew that this sense of rejection, stemming from the very depths of his bloodline, was gnawing away at his will. "She's my partner," Caius said, his voice as raspy as sandpaper scraping against the floor, each word seeming to be squeezed out from between his teeth. "Since when has the council started meddling in the king's private life? When the king is led astray by evil, the council has the right to protect the monarchy." The Grand Duke raised his hand abruptly, and the guards simultaneously aimed their silver spears at us. "Your Majesty, either hand over this sorceress, or you will completely lose your authority as king before everyone's very eyes." In Caius's pupils, that silvery white light began to flicker erratically, as if it might go out at any moment. He let out a sudden, muffled groan and dropped to one knee, his heavy battle armor emitting a grating screech. He clutched his chest in agony. It was being seared by an ancient binding spell, a trap meticulously orchestrated by the Grand Duke, who had exploited my ability to locate the source of the curse to forcibly trigger the curse within him that rejected his mate. "Caius!" I cried out in alarm and rushed over recklessly to catch him. His skin was terrifyingly hot, so hot that the palms of my hands nearly blistered. He jerked his head up. In his silver eyes, red bloodshot veins spread like a spiderweb, a sign that his sanity was on the verge of complete collapse. He roughly shoved me aside, his fingernails digging deep into his own palm. Blood seeped through the cracks in his battle armor, dripping onto the stone tiles with a sizzling, scorching sound. "Stay away from me," he roared in agony, his voice laced with the howls of a wolf. "Get out, before I'm not leaving." I threw my arms around his solid shoulders and pressed my face against his cold battle armor. Even though it was excruciating, I could feel the destructive power surging wildly within him. The Grand Duke let out a chilling laugh. At some point, a withered bone staff had appeared in his hand, its tip emitting black mist. "Look, this is your king. He is losing all his dignity for the sake of a lowly, abandoned girl." I realized that he didn't just want to kill me, he wanted to publicly shatter Caius's spirit, so that the kingdom's army could see how vulnerable their king had become over an Omega. I took a deep breath and forced back the tears welling up in the corners of my eyes. That faint power surging from deep within me was reignited by the mark my father had left on the back of my neck before he left. That was our family's secret technique, a form of soul resonance capable of resonating with an alpha's soul and forcibly suppressing its rampage. I closed my eyes, no longer concerned about the danger of this power being discovered, and pressed my forehead against Caius's. "Caius, listen to me." I pressed my lips close to his, my voice like a clear stream, forcing its way through the noise of bloodlust in his mind. "I'm not a burden to you, I am a part of your soul. If you want to kill me, then kill me along with your last shred of sanity." In that instant, my consciousness seemed to plunge into a pitch-black abyss, the inner world of Caius. I looked at that enormous, scarred silver wolf, which was nailed to a cross by countless black chains that were the Grand Duke's curse. I didn't flinch. I reached out and gripped the searing chains. In an instant, excruciating pain shot through my body. My skin began to crack, and drops of blood seeped out. But I used my own blood to draw the forbidden royal crest on the wolf spirit's forehead. "By the bloodline of the exiles, and by the resonance of these souls, I break these false chains." I uttered one final, low command. Inside the bedchamber, a blinding white light burst forth from the spot where we touched, instantly engulfing the entire hall. The intense shockwave sent the Grand Duke flying backward with a cry of surprise. The bone staff in his hand shattered instantly, and the black mist evaporated without a trace in the sacred light. The guards scattered in terror, unable to look directly at the blinding light. When the glow faded, I collapsed weakly into Caius's arms, gasping for breath. He finally looked up. His silver eyes had regained their clarity, though they were still cold. That brutal, blood-red glow had completely vanished. Caius stood up, without so much as a glance at the Grand Duke, who lay collapsed on the ground. He looked down at me, his gaze brimming with such complex emotions that I felt as if I were about to be overwhelmed. He yanked me up from the ground and pulled me into his embrace with such force that it felt as though he were trying to merge me into his very flesh and blood. His lips trembled as he pressed them against my ear. "You. What on earth did you do?" His voice was so hoarse it was barely recognizable. "That's the royal family's lost art of soul resonance." "Ella, so you really are." "Don't ask," I said, closing my eyes wearily as I felt his heart beating with extraordinary force against his chest. "If you want me to stay alive, don't let anyone find out what I just used." The Grand Duke staggered to his feet, as he looked into Caius's eyes, which were once again radiating an overwhelming aura of power. A look of fear finally crossed his face. "This can't be." A curse that even the late king was unable to suppress. Caius abruptly drew his sword. This time, there was not the slightest hesitation in his movement. The blade was pressed against the Grand Duke's neck, and the Alpha King's absolute authority made the air around them seem to freeze. "It seems you know far more about this curse than I had imagined," Caius sneered, his icy, murderous aura causing the Grand Duke's face to go pale in an instant, effective immediately. "You are stripped of all your parliamentary privileges. Get back to your fiefdom. If you dare lay a finger on her again, I won't hesitate to wipe your family off the face of the earth." The Grand Duke was dragged away by the guards. But I knew this was only a temporary respite. Caius picked me up and carried me deep into the bedchamber. As he laid me down on the soft bed and I watched his scarred body emerge from beneath his armor, I knew that I had become his one and only weakness and that this secret would ultimately be the stake on which our survival in these turbulent times depended. He leaned in close, and just as a kiss with the cool scent of pine was about to land, it was interrupted by the urgent tolling of a bell outside the door. It was the shrill sound of a war bell, the first ever warning of a large-scale rebellion within the kingdom. The roar of the battle bell tore through the night sky. I had heard that piercing sound in my childhood. It was the harbinger of the battle of the blood moon launched by the enemy nation. "Alpha." Caius sprang to his feet beside my bed. His normally neatly trimmed short hair now looked somewhat disheveled, and his silver eyes no longer held even a trace of tenderness. Instead, they were filled with intense resolve and cold composure. "Rebellion." He uttered the word in a deep voice, snatching up the long sword from the table. The cold iron of the hilt glinted with a ghostly, icy sheen in the torchlight. He turned around, his gaze fixed on me like a blazing torch. Before the Grand Duke was stripped of his title, he issued one final order. "The commanders along the border have already defected. They thought I was trapped by the curse and saw this as the perfect opportunity to seize power." Enduring the excruciating pain lingering from our recent spiritual resonance, I forced myself to sit up. "They don't just want to seize power, they want your life. And even more than that, they want the very foundation of this kingdom that you hold in your hands." Caius walked back to me and roughly tossed a heavy set of leather armor onto the bed. "Put it on. The palace isn't safe anymore. You have to come with me to the front lines." "To the front lines? You're taking an Omega into battle?" I looked at him in astonishment. Such an absurd decision was unheard of in the werewolf kingdom. He didn't answer. He just grabbed my shoulders, his fingertips pressing down slightly. "If you stay here, those traitors will tear you to pieces. Only within the reach of my wolf's spirit can you survive." And he paused, his voice so low it was barely audible. "Only by seeing you can I hold on to my last shred of sanity." We stepped into the ancient underground passage, a secret path leading to the hills behind the royal palace. The dim, damp, and chilly air was thick with the musty scent of the earth and the putrid stench of the forest. The moment we emerged from the passage, the sight before us took my breath away. Along the entire border of the royal capital, flames spread like a long dragon. These were no ordinary campfires. They were the ghost fire unique to the enemy nation of Alpha, capable of melting even rock wherever it touched. The earth shook violently, and the mournful howls of a pack of wolves echoed from the distance. I ran close behind Caius through the thorns of the primeval forest, with the roar of each transformation exploding right beside me, though he hadn't transformed himself. The terrifying aura he exuded caused the wild beasts lurking nearby to prostrate themselves on the ground, a display of absolute power. "Don't look behind you." Caius's voice was somewhat muffled by the wind. "Queen Selena has already gone to the north gate with the royal guard to meet the rebels. We're fighting a do-or-die battle now." My heart sank. So that noble queen had been planning this day all along. I turned to look at the castle in the distance and saw, flying from the highest tower, a rebel flag that had long since disappeared. It turned out that this so-called curse was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated diversion she had devised to assist the rebels. Just as we were passing through an ancient ruin, dozens of assassins clad in dark armor burst out from among the trees. Their weapons glowed with an eerie purple light. They were clearly the elite forces of the enemy nation's Alpha, the Shadow Wolf Guards. "Let's go." Caius suddenly shoved me against the stone wall beside us, then let out a roar so deep it nearly shattered the air. That was the aura of a ruler, the spirit of the wolf within him that had been suppressed for far too long. His body swelled suddenly, and amid the terrifying sound of bones shattering and reforming, a massive, silvery figure emerged from the woods. It was Caius in his wolf form, 3 times the size of an ordinary werewolf, with eyes like 2 cold moons, enough to make the blood of all his enemies run cold. The battle erupted in an instant, under his sharp claws. The group of assassins crumbled like fragile sheets of paper. But what terrified me was that, though Caius's wolf form was powerful, the wounds on his body were healing at an extremely slow pace. To protect me, he had taken several blows from poisoned blades heated, and the toxin was now corroding his fur. "No, Caius!" I screamed, trying to rush over. But the intense pressure of the Alpha battle kept me rooted to the spot. Just as he was about to kill the last assassin, a pitch-black arrow suddenly flew in from his side and behind him. The arrowhead was engraved with intricate runes and pierced straight into the back of his neck. Caius let out an agonized howl, and his massive wolf-like body crashed heavily into the ancient tree, shaking loose a shower of snow that blanketed the ground. From the shadows of a stone pillar, a familiar figure slowly emerged. It was Selena. She wore a magnificent battle gown, her eyes filled with a sickly fervor. "Your Majesty, your reign has come to an end. The moon goddess has ultimately chosen a new ruler who will restore absolute order to this land." She turned to look at me, a cruel smile playing on the corners of her mouth. "As for you, little one, your lowly blood will serve perfectly as a sacrifice for this lost kingdom." Caius struggled to get to his feet in the snow, but the power within him was rapidly fading. As I looked into his pained eyes, the power I had been suppressing deep within me could no longer be hidden. I walked toward the massive silver-white wolf, and with every step I took, black thorn flowers bloomed beneath my feet. I felt that power, the awakening of the daughter of the ancient moon goddess that had lain dormant in my blood. I looked at Selena, my voice as cold as a 10,000-year-old glacier. "Do you really think that only scum like you can decide who reigns over this land?" Selena froze. She seemed to have glimpsed a certain light in me that instinctively terrified her. As for me, I gently placed my palm on Caius's forehead. It was not only redemption, but also a huge gamble. A glow pale and sacred moonlight poured from the palm of my hand like a stream of flowing silver liquid, instantly enveloping Caius's scarred wolf-like form. Selena recoiled in horror. The long sword in her hand let out a mournful wail, a natural suppression of this defiled dark magic by the pure power of the moon goddess. "That's impossible!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. "You're nothing but a lowly Omega. Your bloodline was purged long ago. How could you possibly possess the awakening powers of a priest?" I ignored her frenzied howling, all my senses immersed in the depths of Caius's soul. His wolf spirit was caught between rage and exhaustion, while the cursed black arrow gnawed at his life force like a venomous snake. I frantically channeled the essence of my own life into him through the brand on my forehead. The tearing sensation felt as though my soul were being split in two. "Stay alive, Caius," I whispered from the depths of my consciousness. my voice carrying an undeniable solemnity. For your kingdom. And for everything you protect. Caius's enormous silver eyes snapped open. And the once dull glow within them reignited into a raging inferno. He let out a long, earth-shattering howl, no longer a wail of despair, but a proclamation of a king's return. He snapped his head back violently, shattering the black arrow embedded in his neck into dust. The wound healed at a speed visible to the naked eye, even overflowing with a stream of pure, moonlit fire. Upon sensing that overwhelming alpha aura, the personal guards Selena had brought with her all knelt to the ground in unison. Some of the weaker-willed werewolves even shifted into their true forms, cowering on the snow and trembling uncontrollably. Caius rose slowly from the ground, his posture both elegant and terrifying. With every step he took, the surrounding snow turned to ice, and the air itself warped tangibly under the weight of his terrifying presence. Without even glancing at Selena, he walked straight toward me, in that cold, domineering gaze. My face pale as paper was now reflected. He gently brushed my cheek with his massive wolf's lips, a gesture so tender it stood in stark contrast to his earlier slaughter. "You're crazy," he said, shifting back into human form and wrapping my weakened body tightly in his black cloak. A tremor in his voice unlike anything I'd ever heard before. "You drained away most of your own life force to save me. Is it worth it?" Leaning against his broad, burning chest, I looked at Selena's contorted face and whispered, "As long as you remain the king of this kingdom, I've won." Caius turned around, his eyes now restored to their silvery white hue, fixing coldly on Selena. A long sword formed out of thin air in his hand, its blade crafted from moonlight. Wherever the tip pointed, it seemed to slice through the very air. "Selena, it seems my leniency toward you over the past few years has led you to believe, mistakenly, that you can challenge me. Don't kill me." Selena finally broke down. She dropped her weapon and knelt in the snow. "It was the Grand Duke. He gave me the ancient magic. He said that if you continued to be consumed by the curse, this kingdom would fall sooner or later. I just wanted to protect this kingdom." Protection. Caius let out a cold laugh, a laugh that sent the temperature around him plummeting to freezing point. "Is this what you call protection? Colluding with foreign enemies and turning your blade against my partner, plunging the entire capital into a sea of enemy fire, with a single swing of his sword." He did not take her life outright, but instead hacked the crown on her head to pieces. At that moment, Selena let out a piercing scream, the soul-wrenching cry of a werewolf stripped of her status. "From this moment on, you are no longer a queen, nor a member of the nobility. You will be banished to the wasteland and spend the rest of your life in repentance." Caius's verdict was final, but Selena suddenly burst into laughter, a laugh that was eerie and desolate. "Caius, do you really think killing me or banishing me will solve the problem?" She looked at me, her eyes brimming with malice. "The ritual is already complete. You've wasted your life force on this woman. Now your throne is vacant. The Alpha army of the enemy nation is at the city gates, and your so-called loyal followers will soon be bringing your head to her." On the distant horizon, a black tide was already surging the battle tanks of the enemy nation. Alpha, taking advantage of tonight's turmoil, they had launched a full-scale offensive. As Caius gazed at the dark, dense mass, his body tensed once more. "It looks like tonight's drama isn't over yet." He turned to look at me, his eyes flickering with a tenderness bordering on despair. "Ella, if you're having second thoughts now, it's not too late, but I won't let you out of my sight for a single step." I took his hand, weak, yet as firm as a rock. "I don't need a way out, because dying with you is 10,000 times better than living alone in this cold palace." Caius looked at me, then suddenly leaned down and kissed my forehead. The kiss was both icy and fiery, like an ancient vow. He strode forward, and with every step he took, the pack of wolves behind him surged forward like a tide, the king's last line of defense. "Then come with me to face this funeral that belongs to us," he growled, unleashing all the power within him and carrying me as he charged toward the burning battlefield. But just as we charged into enemy lines, I sensed something was wrong. A strange scent hung in the air. It was the same toxic smoke that had filled the air back when my family was wiped out. Could it be that this entire war has been one giant lie from start to finish, one that even kept Caius in the dark? A glow pale and sacred moonlight poured from the palm of my hand like a stream of flowing silver liquid, instantly enveloping Caius's scarred wolf-like body. Selena recoiled in terror. The long sword in her hand let out a mournful wail, a natural suppression of this defiled sorcery by the pure power of the moon goddess. "That's impossible!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. "You're nothing but a lowly Omega. Your bloodline was purged long ago. How could you possibly possess the awakening powers of a priest?" I paid no heed to her frenzied howling. All my senses were immersed in the depths of Caius's soul. His wolf spirit was caught between rage and exhaustion, while the cursed black arrow gnawed at his life force like a venomous snake. I frantically channeled the very essence of my life into him through the brand on my forehead. The tearing sensation felt as though my soul were being split in two. "Stay alive, Caius," I whispered from the depths of my consciousness, my voice carrying an undeniable solemnity. "For your kingdom, and for everything you protect." Caius's enormous silver eyes snapped open, and the once dull glow within them reignited into a raging inferno. He let out a long, earth-shaking howl, no longer a cry of despair, but a proclamation of a king's return. He jerked his head back violently, and the black arrow embedded in his neck was shattered into dust. The wound healed at a speed visible to the naked eye, even overflowing with pure, moonlit fire, upon sensing that overwhelming alpha aura. The personal guards Selena had brought with her all knelt to the ground in unison. Some of the weaker-willed werewolves even shifted into their true forms, cowering on the snow and trembling uncontrollably. Caius rose slowly from the ground, his posture both elegant and terrifying. With every step he took, the surrounding snow turned to ice, and the air itself warped tangibly under the weight of his terrifying presence. Without even glancing at Selena, he walked straight toward me, in that cold, domineering gaze. My face pale as paper was now reflected. He gently brushed my cheek with his massive wolf's lips, a gesture so tender it stood in stark contrast to his earlier slaughter. "You're crazy," he said, shifting back into human form and wrapping my weakened body tightly in his black cloak. A tremor in his voice unlike anything I'd ever heard before. "You drained away most of your own life force to save me. Is it worth it?" Leaning against his broad, burning chest, I looked at Selena's contorted face and whispered, "As long as you remain the king of this kingdom, I've won." Caius turned around, his eyes now restored to their silvery white hue, fixing coldly on Selena. A long sword formed out of thin air in his hand, its blade crafted from moonlight. Wherever the tip pointed, it seemed to slice through the very air. "Selena, it seems my leniency toward you over the past few years has led you to believe, mistakenly, that you can challenge me. Don't kill me." Selena finally broke down. She dropped her weapon and knelt in the snow. "It was the Grand Duke. He gave me the ancient magic. He said that if you continued to be consumed by the curse, this kingdom would fall sooner or later. I just wanted to protect this kingdom." Protection. Caius let out a cold laugh, a laugh that sent the temperature around him plummeting to freezing point. "Is this what you call protection? Colluding with foreign enemies and turning your blade against my partner, plunging the entire capital into a sea of enemy fire, with a single swing of his sword." He did not take her life outright, but instead hacked the crown on her head to pieces. At that moment, Selena let out a piercing scream, the soul-wrenching cry of a werewolf stripped of her status. "From this moment on, you are no longer a queen, nor a member of the nobility. You will be banished to the wasteland and spend the rest of your life in repentance." Caius's verdict was final, but Selena suddenly burst into laughter, a laugh that was eerie and desolate. "Caius, do you really think killing me or banishing me will solve the problem?" She looked at me, her eyes brimming with malice. "The ritual is already complete. You've wasted your life force on this woman. Now your throne is vacant. The Alpha army of the enemy nation is at the city gates, and your so-called loyal followers will soon be bringing your head to her." On the distant horizon, a black tide was already surging the battle tanks of the enemy nation. Alpha, taking advantage of tonight's turmoil, they had launched a full-scale offensive. As Caius gazed at the dark, dense mass, his body tensed once more. It looks like tonight's drama isn't over yet. He turned to look at me, his eyes flickering with a tenderness bordering on despair. Ella, if you're having second thoughts now, it's not too late, but I won't let you out of my sight for a single step. I took his hand, weak, yet as firm as a rock. I don't need a way out, because dying with you is 10,000 times better than living alone in this cold palace. Caius looked at me, then suddenly leaned down and kissed my forehead. The kiss was both icy and fiery, like an ancient oath. He strode forward, and with every step he took, the pack of wolves behind him surged forward like a tide, the king's final line of defense. Then come with me to face this funeral that belongs to us, he growled, unleashing all the power within him and carrying me as he charged toward the burning battlefield. But just as we charged into enemy lines, I sensed something was wrong. A strange scent hung in the air. It was the same toxic smoke that had filled the air back when my family was wiped out. The stench of blood on the battlefield was so thick it made one want to vomit. That sickly sweet, putrid odor, that breath of death symbolizing the downfall of my clan, once again exploded in the air at that moment. Caius's sword precisely slit the throat of an enemy alpha. His movements were fluid and seamless. But at that very moment, he abruptly halted his attack, and his body shook violently. Caius! I cried out, grabbing hold of his shoulders just as he was about to collapse. That's not ordinary smoky, it's magic-suppressing dust. It'll seal away your wolf spirit. He forced himself to stay on his feet. Dark red bloodshot veins began to appear in his silver eyes, and the agony of forcibly suppressing that power caused the veins on his forehead to bulge. Amid the vast army, the enemy nation's King Alpha strode forward with unhurried confidence. Following behind him was not one of his subordinates, but me, older brother, Ryan, who should have perished long ago in the fire. Ryan was clad in cold, black armor. His face was completely bloodless, and his eyes stared at us vacantly, as if he were a puppet being manipulated. Your Majesty, hasn't this play been entertaining enough? Ryan spoke, his voice as stiff as stone grinding against stone. Those old fools of the Grand Dukes are nothing but bait on a chessboard. The ones who truly seek to kill you are the very ones who propelled you to power, the royal priesthood. My heart sank into an ice cellar. The College of Priests. That is the holiest institution in this kingdom, and for as long as anyone can remember, Caius has been nothing more than a divine statue in the hands of the College of Priests. Rain. Caius gasped with difficulty. The tip of his sword pointed at the man he had once considered his closest friend. Did you betray the border? What were you after? For survival, and to reclaim the glory of our bloodline that you have usurped. Ryan stepped in front of Caius, a twisted glimmer of pity flashing in his eyes. You've always thought of yourself as the king who controls everything, but from the day you were born, you've been nothing more than a seed. They turn you into a bloodthirsty, frenzied creature, all so that you can fully merge with that cursed ancient wolf spirit. And then, Rain looked at me with a gaze that sent a chill down my spine. When the time is right, we'll have an omega of pure priestly lineage unite with you. Through soul resonance, we'll extract this matured, ultimate power and offer it as a sacrifice to the moon goddess, thereby achieving what is known as eternal kingship. I was struck as if by lightning and froze in my tracks. So that's why the Parliament, the Grand Duke, the Queen, and even I had been drawn into this. This marriage was by no means a romantic encounter, but rather a 20-year-long, meticulously planned ritual. No. You're lying, I said, shaking my head as tears streamed down my face. I looked at Caius. My reflection was all that could be seen in his desperate eyes. Caius, don't believe him. If you really are just a vessel, then by suppressing the curse for you just now, didn't I actually end up helping them? Caius let out a bitter, sorrowful laugh. He slowly sheathed his sword, allowing the enemy encirclement to close in around him. He looked at me, his eyes strangely radiating a sense of serene relief. Ella, so this is the real reason you appeared by my side. I knew it. That's why your kiss felt so familiar and yet so deadly. No. I lunged at him, trying to cover his mouth, but he pinned me against his chest. It wasn't your fault, he whispered softly in my ear, his tone so gentle it broke my heart. You're not their Ponyuri, the only wild card. If you hadn't saved me just now, they would have forcibly drained this power from me by now. Now, if they want something whole, they'll have to take it from both of our corpses. King, hand her over. Ryan drew his sword, his eyes devoid of any mercy. The council of priests has surrounded the entire forbidden forest. If you let her go now, you can save your life and continue to be their puppet king. Caius suddenly looked up. At that moment, his silver eyes turned completely dark gold, and the aura of a primordial deity broke free from the constraints of the magic-suppressing dust. He held me close, his back turned to the sea of enemy soldiers. In that moment, he was no longer the ruler of the kingdom, but simply a man who wanted nothing more than to protect the one he loved. Tell those priests. Caius's voice boomed like an oracle, echoing across the entire battlefield and causing everyone within earshot to shudder instinctively. Since they are the ones who bestowed this power, I will, at this very moment, tear it to shreds with my own hands. He suddenly pressed his hand against the mark on the back of my neck, the very point where our life forces resonated. He wasn't trying to draw power from me. He was unleashing an energy backlash powerful enough to destroy the entire altar. What are you doing? You're going to die. I shouted in terror. If the price is turning you into their sacrifice, Caius said, his forehead pressed against mine, a smile that held a kind of bitter tenderness. I'd rather let this kingdom vanish along with me. In that instant, a massive rift tore open in the sky, and silvery moonlight coalesced into a beam of light that struck the center of the altar with a thunderous crash. The ground began to collapse, and Ryan and the enemy soldiers screamed in terror. But I could feel our souls merging with one another. It wasn't some ritual. It was the ultimate fusion of our lives. A sense of suspense followed. As the altar collapsed, the ground beneath our feet vanished completely. In the endless darkness, I could feel that Caius's grip had never loosened. But amid this cataclysmic backlash, I heard a whisper from the ancient moon god. The end of the ritual is the beginning of rebirth. But one of your souls must fall into eternal darkness. We were falling, our bodies gradually disintegrating in the light. And I saw Caius's soul drifting bit by bit into nothingness. Darkness is not the end, but a long, cold baptism. Amid the excruciating pain of my soul being torn apart, I felt Caius's broad, calloused hands still clenching my fingertips tightly. It was his final, desperate attempt to pull me back from the abyss before his consciousness faded. Ella, stay alive. His voice seemed to come from beyond 10,000 years, carrying a sense of shattered release. As that devastating light exploded completely, I felt a warm liquid splash across my face. It was his blood, and also the source that gave me new life. When all fell silent, I crashed heavily onto the cold ruins of the altar, surrounded by a landscape ravaged by war, where the remains of the enemy had turned to dust. I suddenly opened my eyes. Through my blurred vision, I saw Caius lying among the boulders not far away. His magnificent battle armor had long since been shattered into pieces. His once silvery white hair had lost its luster, and his chest no longer rose and fell. No. Caius. I staggered toward him, feeling every bone in my body groan with every movement. As I fell into his arms, I felt his skin growing cold. That desperate fear made me let out a heart-wrenching scream, and I poured all of my remaining awakened power of the moon goddess into his body, even if it meant I would be instantly drained. You promised me we'd protect this kingdom together. You can't. You can't just leave me behind like this. Tears fell onto his pale cheeks, and I sensed a faint, almost imperceptible pulse of life trembling within him. It wasn't a heartbeat, it was his soul struggling. Just then, a gap tore open in the clouds, and a full moon emerged, a blood moon 3 times larger than usual, radiating a pure, brilliant light. An ancient will descended upon us. It was not the greedy sacrifice sought by the priesthood, but a covenant of equality. I heard the moon goddess whisper in my ear, only pure love and sacrifice can bring about the king's return. Without the slightest hesitation, I pressed my forehead against his chest, completely stripping away the last seed of hope in my life and infusing it into his body. My vision began to blur, and my body gradually turned transparent. I thought I would die. That I would be reduced to ashes by this backlash. But what I saw instead was the wound on Caius's chest beginning to writhe and heal under the moonlight. That night, the people of the kingdom witnessed a miracle. From the ruins of the destroyed altar, a silver pillar of light rose, piercing the heavens and the earth. Within that pillar of light, Caius slowly opened his eyes. The dark gold and silvery white intertwined in his gazzite was a power that transcended that of any alpha. It was the true, divine right to rule, recognized by the moon goddess. But I completely lost consciousness in his arms. I don't know how much time had passed when I woke up on a bed that was incredibly soft. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting its glow on the golden curtains. The smell of blood had vanished from the air, replaced by the faint scent of sandalwood and lilies. "You're awake." That deep, familiar voice came from the side of the bed. I turned my head, and there sat Caius, wearing a simple white silk shirt. His face, once as cold and sharp as a knife's edge, now appeared more serene than ever, though his silver eyes still betrayed a sense of relief at having survived a catastrophe. "I thought I'd never see you again." He took my hand and pressed my palm against his cheek. I looked around and realized we were in the innermost sanctuary of the palace. Outside the window, the cheering crowd was celebrating the victory in the war. "Is the rebellion over?" I whispered. The Grand Duke's family was uprooted, and the priesthood was thoroughly purged. "Rain. He got away. But as far as I'm concerned, he's no longer a threat." Caius stood up, pulled back the curtains, and pointed to the kingdom outside the window, which had been completely transformed. "Now, it's just us here." He walked to the bedside and knelt on one knee. At that moment, this once ruthless tyrant, this king who ruled over countless werewolves, bowed his noble head. He pulled a ring from his pocket. It was set with a moonstone that had been broken and then reassembled. "I used to think that power was my shield and fate was my shackle." He gazed at me tenderly, each word carrying the weight of 1,000 pounds. "But it wasn't until you walked into that palace that I realized you are the very lifeblood of my existence. Ella, will you be the Luna Queen of this kingdom? Not as a sacrifice, but as my one and only equal partner." I looked at him. The sunlight made him seem so real. In the midst of this whirlwind of bloodshed and betrayal, we finally held each other. I reached out and gently touched the bridge of his nose with my fingertips. All the past misunderstandings, conspiracies, and wounds dissolved into dust in that moment. "I do." He stood up, leaned down, and kissed me. It was a long, almost sacred kiss. And at that very moment, the church bells outside rang out loudly. The entire kingdom was rejoicing, not merely to celebrate victory in war, but to welcome the dawn of a new era. The fog lifted, and the truth was revealed. At that glorious coronation, he placed the crown upon my head in front of all the nobles and warriors. As he took my hand and looked out over our subjects, I felt his palm clasp mine tightly, as if to say, no matter how many plots the future may hold, no matter whether the threat named Ryan returns, as long as we are together, this is the best possible ending. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, then turned to the king standing beside Meth, one who had completely rewritten the fate of the werewolves. I knew that the first page of our legend had only just been turned.